think there's a lot of racial hatred today, but I think it's coming from the other side. There's more minority racism today, I think, than coming from the members of the white majority in America.
Former KKK leader David Duke, who said he voted for Donald Trump to, quote, take our country back, lost his campaigns for U.S. Senator and Louisiana governor in the 1990s, thanks in part to anti-racism activist Tim Wise, who worked for an organization founded for the purpose of defeating Duke. In an epic tweet storm this week, Wise compared the challenges Democrats face now to what they faced when Duke was running for office. And Tim is back with me. Tim, I'm going to read one of these tweets because this was epic. You wrote, people who say that the Dems should ignore Trump's race baiting because it's some genius political strategy calculated to distract us are idiots. He's no genius. And if you downplay it, you normalize him. If you make this about policy, you normalize him. He is a racist. Expand on that and explain, if you were running a campaign against Donald Trump, how you would do it.
Well, I would start by recognizing that Trumpism did not gain steam based on policy. The people who voted for Donald Trump didn't sit down and compare policy positions and 10-point plans. They were responding to the rage that Donald Trump was tapping into. He hates who they hate, and that is why they have stuck with him. I'm talking about the hardcore base. So you're not going to win an election against an emotional movement by just talking about your wonderful plan for this or for that or the other thing. Not that we don't need good plans, but I think the entire campaign of any Democrat needs to be focused on the existential threat that Trumpism poses to the America that we care about and the values that we believe in, which means talking about the way in which this divide and conquer, this bigotry, racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, all of it plays into a politic that doesn't solve our problems, which is intended to distract from those problems. It's the same thing that David Duke tried to do in Louisiana. And the only reason that we were ultimately able to defeat not just Duke the man, but Dukeism, the movement, was by making it a moral crusade, because we had a lot of people on the left, progressives like myself. You had other people that were reasonable Republicans and moderates. They're probably not going to agree on policy. They're not going to agree on tax policy or jobs policy or health care. But one thing we were able to get them to agree on was that there was something fundamentally un-American at the most basic decency level about Dukeism. That's going to have to be the message that's going to unify people, not just simply having really good plans for this or that policy. And I'm afraid that right now, the Democrats are still acting. They're bringing spreadsheets to a gunfight, right? Yeah. They're bringing debate evidence to a gunfight rather than understanding this is about values, the values that we care about as a country, as opposed to the values that Trumpism represents.
And I've talked to you about this before, and I interviewed for my book, and it was great. You are great. Did David Duke run an explicitly racist campaign for governor and senator, or did he try to run on something else?
Oh, it was explicitly racist, but of course he tried to cover that up and make it about, taxes are too high, but he always talked about the reason for that was all the spending we do on, quote unquote, those people. Or he would talk about the fact that unemployment was high for white folks, but the reason was they're taking your job, whether it's immigrants or, black folks because of affirmative action. So it was explicitly racist, and the only way he was defeated ultimately was when we drilled down onto that. We didn't, talk about sidelight issues. Now, the first time, unfortunately, we did. In the U.S. Senate race, those of us in the organization that were fighting him ended up having to sort of go down that road. We had consultants and some conservatives in our own coalition that were afraid to challenge him on his racism. So they said, oh, let's talk about the fact that he paid his taxes late. Or let's talk about the fact that he didn't go to Vietnam. The guy's a Nazi. That's a side issue. You need to focus on what's real and focus people on the moral issue.
What do you think about the people who say the only way to defeat Donald Trump is to pivot off of talking about his racism, pivot off of talking about him at all, and just talk about health care?
I think that's absolutely absurd. No one is sitting around saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to vote this year, and then all of a sudden they're going to get online and look at somebody's 10-point plan for health care and go, oh, well, now I'll do it. That's not to say that we don't need good plans for health care. But that is not what is going to drive people to the polls. It is not what is going to get people excited about this as a moral crusade, where they're actually able to say, in this moment, I stood up and I did something. Donald Trump did not come to power on the basis of policy. Now, his hardcore base, they're not going to move. We know that. David Duke kept 91% of his voters from the Senate race to the governor's race. And the reason for that was very simple. The only way that you could get Duke's people to leave him, or Trump's probably now, is for them to acknowledge they voted for a monster, and nobody wants to do that. So those folks are lost, but those independent voters, of whom there aren't nearly as many as we think, and the progressive base have to be driven to the polls, yes, on the basis of some decent plans, and policies, but also on the basis of a values decision. What kind of America do we want to live in? This is an existential threat. It is not a normal campaign. You cannot run against Donald Trump the way you would George W. Bush, by comparing plans and policies, because Trumpism is fundamentally at its root an authoritarian neo-fascist movement rooted in emotion, not logic. You cannot bring that spreadsheet to the gunfight. You cannot treat politics like the debate team when the other side treats it like the cheerleading squad and knows how to get people pumped up for that. So yes, Democrats need plans. I'm not saying they don't, but every time they talk about those, they should filter that back by critiquing the politics of prejudice, which is all Trumpism has ever been about.
I hope people listen to you, Tim Wise, with some wise words from experience. Tim Wise, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And coming up, Donald Trump's chief.